my daughter said. My husband taught her a lesson. Everyone shocked about I had just finished wiping down the counter when I saw Junie Bell trying to pour herself a glass of water. She always insisted on doing things herself, 8 years old going on 30, she liked to say. The pitcher was too full for her tiny hands, and the glass too close to the edge. I opened my mouth to warn her, but it was too late. The water splashed across the table, spilling onto Travis's freshly pressed shirt. He slammed his hand down on the oak table so hard the salt shaker jumped. Jesus Christ! Junie, look at this mess! His voice boomed through the kitchen like a shotgun. Junie froze, hands shaking, the glass clinking against the tile floor. Her little lip trembled, eyes darting between her father and me. I stepped in without thinking, instinct, the way I used to step between my late husband and our daughter decades ago. Travis, I said quietly, it's just water. She's trying her best. He turned to me slowly, his nostrils flaring. Are you telling me how to raise my kid now? I'm saying she doesn't need to be scared to grow up right. That was all it took. He stood so fast the chair scraped against the floor with a screech, and before I could take a step back, his hand cracked across my face. My left ear rang and I stumbled, the edge of the counter catching my hip. Something warm trickled down the side of my face. Junie screamed. The glass shattered against the floor. I blinked through the blur, my knees unsteady, the sting in my cheek swelling fast. I looked at him, but he was already turning away, like I was nothing but an annoying sound in the room. Coraline walked in, finally, like she had been waiting for the scream. Her heels clicked against the tile. She glanced once at my bleeding temple, then at Travis, then back at me. She needed that, she said flatly. A reminder that she's just a guest here. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. Junie was still crying. Her little hands reached toward me, but Coraline pulled her back with a sharp tug. Go to your room, she snapped. She's bleeding, Mama, Junie whispered. Daddy hit. I said go to your room. The door slammed. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, sour, like rot in the walls. Travis poured himself another glass of water. Coraline leaned on the counter, arms crossed, her gaze never softening. I pressed a napkin to my temple. My fingers came away red. I raised you, I said quietly. I carried you in a storm, breastfed you through fevers, stayed up nights so you wouldn't feel alone in a world that didn't care about poor girls like us. You used to sleep curled into my side like a kitten. What happened to her? Coraline didn't blink. She grew up. You're a mother now, I said. How can you see him do that and not? She cut me off with a flick of her wrist. He pays the mortgage. He works 70 hours a week to keep this house. You don't. You contribute nothing but judgment and stale air. So no, you don't get to say anything. I didn't come here to judge. No, you came because your legs gave out and no one else would take you. That one cut deeper than the slap. I looked down at the water still dripping from the table to the floor, the blood from my temple mixing into it as it ran along the tile. The wet trail looked like some kind of abstract truth painting itself across her pristine kitchen. I'll clean it, I murmured. You will, she said. And after that, you'll stay downstairs where you belong. If you can't respect my home, you're free to leave any time. I nodded once, slowly, because any faster and I might fall again. I bent down with a rag in my hand. Not because I felt wrong, but because I had learned that sometimes dignity looks like survival. And I would survive this. Even if it was the second time my daughter watched me bleed and did nothing. And this time, I would remember everything. The doctor's voice was calm, almost too calm, when he said, Mrs. Hollowell, I don't think you should be living alone anymore. He was young, maybe 35, and kind enough, but he spoke like he was giving instructions to a piece of paperwork. He didn't mean I was helpless. He meant the body remembers every fall longer than the bones do. It had been a small fall, nothing dramatic. I had slipped in the bathroom trying to reach the towel bar. A cracked hip, bruised ribs, and 2 days in a hospital bed staring at stained ceiling tiles. But that small fall cracked open something bigger. I could see it in the nurse's face, in the way they didn't want to discharge me back to that cold, creaky house in Butte. The house had been mine for over 30 years. After the divorce, I kept it, though it was barely held together with caulking and prayer. It had drafty windows, a temperamental boiler, and the smell of pine that lingered no matter how long I was gone. But it was mine. It was the last place I had slept beside someone who once called me love, even if he became a man I had to hide bruises from. But now they were telling me I needed supervision. And there was only one person left they could call. Coraline showed up at the hospital with a scarf around her neck and irritation all over her face. She did not hug me. She did not ask if I was in pain. She sat at the foot of the bed, crossed her legs like she was in court, and said, "Why didn't you call someone before you got on that ladder?" I had not been on a ladder. "I slipped getting out of the tub," I said. "No one else to call." She made a noise in her throat somewhere between a sigh and a scoff. "This isn't sustainable, Mother. You're not 80, but you're acting like it." "I know how to boil soup and use a microwave," I said. "I just lost my balance." She rolled her eyes. "Do you know how many times Mrs. Graham has asked me why my mother is still living alone in that haunted house? I'm tired of pretending this is normal. It was not love that brought me to her home. It was pressure from neighbors, from social expectations, from her desire to maintain the illusion that she was the kind of daughter who took care of her own. Within a week, I was packed and relocated to a suburb where every mailbox looked like a miniature chapel. They put me in the basement. It felt less like help and more like exile. The room had no windows and smelled of mildew and detergent. There was no heater, only a portable unit that clicked and hummed like it was dying. The floor slanted. There was one small cot with a thin mattress, a rickety dresser, and a lamp that flickered when the washing machine ran. On the first night, I reached for the light switch by instinct and found none. Travis had to install a pull-chain lamp like I was some forgotten tenant in a fallout shelter. "This used to be storage," Coraline said. "We cleared it out for you. It's not permanent, just until you're stronger." I nodded. What else could I say? I had learned the tone in her voice, not cruel but cold. Like marble. You do not argue with marble. You let it weigh down your chest until you forget you were ever breathing freely. Travis came down the next morning with a cup of coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. He took a glance at the space, then at me, sitting on the cot. "Well," he said, grinning, "beats a nursing home. You've got electricity, privacy, and hey, no curfews." He sipped his coffee. "Beggars can't be choosers, right?" He left before I could answer. Later that afternoon, I heard Coraline talking to someone on the phone upstairs, her voice sharp. "No, she's here. In the basement. Of course she's fine. No, we're not putting her in a home. She'd never survive it. I don't need another lawsuit to deal with. Thanks." When she came down with a tray, some dry toast, and a hard-boiled egg, she looked at me for the first time that day. "I know it's not perfect, Mother," she said. "But let's not act like you're some tragic figure. No one forced you to live in isolation all these years. I chose peace." She gave a tight laugh. "You chose martyrdom." I did not reply. I wanted to. I wanted to say that I chose silence because the world punished women who shouted. I wanted to say I chose space because no one offered kindness. But instead, I looked at the peeling corner of the ceiling tile and nodded like I was grateful. I was not. I learned quickly to keep out of the upstairs unless invited. I cooked only when they were gone, and cleaned when they were asleep. I made myself small, invisible, a ghost in my daughter's house. I did not want to provoke. I did not want to fight. But I heard the things Travis said when he thought the floorboards muted him. I saw the way Coraline flinched when he raised his voice. I noticed how Junie's drawings turned darker, her voices softer, her eyes older than they should have been. I thought, if I stayed quiet, I could keep an eye on them. I could protect Junie. I thought I was doing the right thing. Until the night, my silence got me slapped, And even then, they told me I was lucky to be here at all. When Coraline was little, she used to hide under the dining table whenever her father's voice turned sharp. I would see the outline of her small knees pressed to her chest, her fingers covering her ears. The first time he hit me in front of her, she was 7. The sound of the slap echoed through the house like a gunshot. I remember thinking only of her, not of myself. I told her afterward that her father was tired, that grown-ups sometimes argued, that everything was fine. I thought protecting her meant pretending. That was the beginning of her contempt. As she grew older, she learned to look away, to see me not as a mother but as a woman too weak to leave. I caught her eyes sometimes, filled not with pity but with embarrassment, like she couldn't believe she shared my blood. In school, she told friends her mother worked at the hospital, never that I cleaned floors there after losing my nursing license because I missed too many shifts caring for her. She edited me out of her life before she was even 15. When she was 16, I packed our bags to leave him. I remember the tremor in my hands, the small suitcase with all we could carry, the bus tickets hidden in my coat. She saw them and ripped them up. "If you leave, I'll stay with him," she said. "At least he doesn't cry all the time." She was too young to know what cruelty she was speaking, too old to unhear the lies he whispered into her ear about her weak mother. By the time she left for college, she stopped visiting. She sent polite Christmas cards with no return address, and when I called her dorm once, her roommate said, "She doesn't talk about her family." I understood. Shame is a hard thing to argue with. It hardens faster than cement. I watched her become everything she thought I wasn't: decisive, confident, ruthless. She got her law degree and married a man who reminded me so much of her father I could barely breathe the first time I met him. She said he was steady, reliable, the kind of man who never leaves. But I saw the same storm behind his smile. Travis had that same fixed smile, the one that never reached his eyes. When he shook my hand, his grip lingered too long, as if asserting territory. Coraline's laugh was too bright, her eyes darting to his for approval. I knew that look. I had worn it once myself. At their wedding, I tried to warn her. I told her gently, in the quiet of the dressing room, "Honey, if he ever raises his hand to you, don't wait 30 years like I did." She froze, lipstick in hand, and said, "You didn't wait. You stayed. That's not patience, that's weakness." The words stung worse than any blow I'd ever taken. She wore her pain like a medal, not realizing it was the same chain in disguise. But the first night I saw her flinch when Travis slammed a door, I knew she'd only changed the setting, not the story. When I finally divorced her father at 62, she didn't come to the hearing. She sent a short message. "You could have done that when it mattered." I didn't reply. What could I say? That courage doesn't always come when we want it to, but when it finally does, it's still worth something. She never believed that. To her, my endurance was cowardice, my forgiveness was foolishness. Every bruise I had hidden became proof of my failure. She used my silence as a weapon against me, the same way her father had used his fists. And the cruelest part was she thought it made her strong. When I moved in with her, I realized the hatred hadn't faded with time. It had ripened. She had built her entire identity around never becoming me. She prided herself on control, on never crying, never pleading, never yielding. She said once, "Women like you made men think they could get away with everything. I'll never let anyone see me that small." And yet, every time Travis spoke over her, every time he corrected her in front of company, she smiled that same empty smile I used to wear. One night, she and I were alone in the kitchen. She had had too much wine, and for the first time in years, her guard dropped. "You ruined my childhood," she said quietly. "You let him hurt you. You let him hurt me. You didn't protect us." I whispered, "I stayed so you could eat. I stayed because I thought he'd change. I stayed because leaving meant losing you." She shook her head. "You stayed because you were afraid to be alone." Maybe she was right. Maybe I was afraid. But fear doesn't make love less real, it just makes it more desperate. She set her glass down too hard, and the stem snapped. "You want me to forgive you," she said. "But I won't. You taught me that weakness is contagious." She left me there with the shards. Since then, I've learned that resentment can pass from mother to daughter like an heirloom. It grows in silence, nurtured by misunderstanding, watered by pride. Coraline built her life on rejecting mine, and she called it strength. But the truth is, she was only repeating what she saw. That love, to her, always came with pain, and that hurting first meant never being hurt again. By then, her resentment had calcified into belief that cruelty was control, and control was survival. So when Travis hit me that night in her kitchen, and she didn't move to stop him, I saw not cruelty, but recognition. She wasn't defending him. She was defending the lie she had built her whole life on. And I, her mother, was the reminder she could never quite bury. Junie had started crawling into my basement room more often at night. At first, she made excuses, bad dreams, too hot upstairs, wanted a story. But the way her small hands clutched the edge of my blanket, the way her breathing hitched when a door slammed upstairs, told a different story. Children do not lie the way adults do. Their silence is honest. Their fear is unfiltered. One evening, as I was brushing her hair with the little wooden comb I kept by the bed, she asked, "Ba, why do grown-ups yell when they love each other?" I set the comb down slowly. "Who told you that?" I asked. Mama said, "Yelling means Daddy still cares." I pressed a kiss to the crown of her head, swallowing the dry burn in my throat. That was exactly what I used to believe. That night, I opened the drawer beside the bed and took out a small, silver watch. It was scratched on the side and a bit worn at the strap, but the digital screen still worked. Years ago, a patient gave it to me after I helped her leave her abusive partner. It had a recording feature, not fancy, but enough. I held it out to her. "This is yours now," I said. "If you ever feel scared and you do not know what to do, press this button. It will record whatever is happening." She looked at it with wide eyes. "Like a spy?" "Not a spy," I smiled gently. "A witness. Sometimes people need to hear what you hear, to believe what you feel. Your voice matters. Your fear matters." Junie bit her lip and nodded solemnly. She slid the watch onto her wrist and stared at the blinking screen, like it was armor. "If someone's mean to me, should I yell back?" she asked. "No," I said. "You press the button, and later you tell someone who listens." She wrapped her arms around my waist. Her voice was muffled against my shirt. "I'm glad you listen." 2 nights later, it happened. I heard them through the ceiling, the heavy thud of Travis's boots, the rising pitch in Coraline's voice, the sharp crack of something breaking. I sat upright in bed, pulse racing, waiting for the silence that usually followed. But this time, I heard something different. A door creaked open. Tiny footsteps hurried down the stairs, and then she was there, Junie trembling, barefoot, holding out the silver watch. "Bah," she whispered, "I did it. I pressed the button like you said." She handed me the watch with both hands, like it was something sacred. I pressed play. Travis's voice was first, harsh and unmistakable. "You think I care what your mother says? That old woman doesn't run this house." Then Coraline's voice, colder than I had ever heard her. "She's filling that girl's head with fear and softness. Junie's starting to act just like her weak." There was a crash glass, maybe a dish, and then Junie's voice, soft and barely audible, "Please stop." Then Coraline again, snapping. "See? She talks back now. Just like my mother. Always pretending to protect people and leaving them worse." The recording ended in silence. I looked at Junie, her small face pale and her lip trembling. "I can't press it again," she said. "It only records once." "You did enough," I whispered, holding her close. Her heartbeat fluttered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "If you leave," she said into my shoulder, "who's going to protect me?" I held her tighter, tears stinging my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt a clarity that was not born from pain, but from duty. Not the duty to be silent, to endure, but the duty to break a cycle. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Not until I make sure you are safe. Not this time." Junie didn't answer, but she held on tighter, and I knew she believed me. I had not seen Ruthie Callahan in over 20 years. Last I remembered, she was a trembling young woman sitting across from me in the community clinic, clutching her stomach and refusing to meet my eyes. Her husband had fractured 2 of her ribs and knocked out a molar. She had come in to ask for painkillers, but left with a shelter address and my home phone number written on the back of a pharmacy receipt. Now she wore tailored navy slacks, a sleek black coat, and a pin on her lapel that read, "Montana Coalition for Family Justice." Her hair was pulled back into a bun, her voice steady, eyes sharp. She didn't look like someone who had once crawled into my exam room half-conscious. She looked like someone who had learned how to fight. When I walked into her office, she looked up from her laptop and for a moment, just a moment, her whole face softened. "Eunice Hollowell," she said, standing slowly, "I've waited a long time to repay this debt." I didn't know what to say to that, so I opened my coat, sat down, and pulled out a large manila envelope. "I need help," I said. "Not for me. For my granddaughter." I handed her the envelope. Inside were 3 items: the recording from Junie's watch, my handwritten journals from the 1,990 seconds, and Coraline's original birth certificate, with my name still listed as guardian from the temporary custody order after my husband's second arrest. It had never been formally dissolved. Ruthie put on her glasses and began reading the entries in silence. I watched her hand tremble as she turned a page. "She was 8, I said softly. "The first time she saw her father throw me into the hallway. I told her I slipped. She pretended to believe me, but I know she didn't." Ruthie reached for the tissue box on her desk, but didn't cry. She blew out a breath and said, "This is enough." "You think so?" "I know so." She tapped the watch. "This alone would get Child Protective Services involved. But your journal? Your legal standing as former guardian? We can file an emergency order of protection. Get Junie removed from that house." I stared down at my hands. I should have done this years ago, but I was too afraid of breaking her life apart. "She's already living in pieces, Eunice," Ruthie said gently. "You're not breaking anything, you're collecting the shards." I nodded, though something inside me still felt like it was betraying my daughter. I had spent my entire life covering for other people's rage. Now, I was exposing it, hers included. Ruthie filed the papers that day. The drive back to Butte felt longer than it should have. Each mile peeled away a layer of fear I didn't know I was still carrying. 3 days later, I stood in a family courtroom wearing my best wool coat and holding Junie's hand. Her little fingers clung to mine like they had that night in the basement. Coraline and Travis sat across the aisle, Coraline's eyes burning. Travis wearing that same smug grin he had when he handed me a mop and said, "You missed a spot." The judge looked over the documents with a raised brow. Ruthie stood and presented everything with precision, calm, factual, devastating. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Hollowell, would you like to say anything?" I hadn't planned to, but I stood. My knees shook, my voice wavered, but I met Coraline's eyes and said, "When I was 30, I told myself silence was love. That keeping the family together was worth bruises, worth insults, worth losing pieces of myself. I believed that teaching my daughter to endure was teaching her strength, but it wasn't. It was teaching her that pain is normal." I looked down at Junie, who squeezed my hand. "I cannot undo what I allowed to happen back then, but I can stop it from happening again. I am no longer afraid of speaking the truth, and I will not let this child grow up believing that silence is safety." The courtroom was quiet. Coraline blinked once, quickly, but did not look away. Travis shifted in his seat, arms crossed tight across his chest. The judge nodded. "Emergency guardianship is granted to Mrs. Hollowell, effective immediately. Visitation rights for the parents will be determined after further investigation by CPS." My breath left me in a single exhale. Junie whispered, "We get to go home?" I knelt beside her and brushed her hair from her eyes. "Yes," I said, "we do. And this time, no one would take her from me." The fall of a man like Travis Merrick did not happen quietly. It happened in headlines, in whispers behind closed office doors, and in the faces of parents watching news clips on their phones while stirring spaghetti sauce. Once the court ruled him to be a danger to minors, once his name appeared on a public child endangerment list, his job at the private school where he'd taught history for 9 years vanished overnight. The official statement from the school board was clinical: termination due to moral misconduct and violation of student safety protocols. But the truth wasn't hidden for long. Someone leaked the audio Junie had recorded. The insults, the threats, Coraline's cruel, scathing voice saying, "She learned that resistance from my mother." And worse, the video. I didn't know the neighbors had a camera pointed at the driveway. It was meant for packages and porch pirates, but it captured everything the night Travis struck me. The image wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough to see him standing over me, hand raised, my body crumpling to the ground like a dropped coat. Someone posted it anonymously. It went viral within hours, and suddenly, the secret lived in every phone screen across the state. The caption read, "She's your mother, not your punching bag." Comment sections filled with outrage. If that was my mom, he'd be eating through a straw. And the daughter just stood there? That poor little girl, thank God the grandma got her out. Parents withdrew their kids from the school. Local newspapers ran op-eds. Travis tried to blame a smear campaign, but the footage and his voice on the tape couldn't be spun. He vanished without noise, the kind of silence that follows shame. And Coraline? She thought she'd survive it. She always did. But Ruthie filed a formal complaint with the Montana Bar Association, not just for Coraline's silence during the abuse, but for her role in enabling it. The association launched an investigation. Emails surfaced. Witnesses were interviewed. A former intern came forward, saying Coraline told her, "If it's just bruises, it's still a family issue." Her license was suspended pending review. By month's end, she was officially barred from practicing law indefinitely. The press called it a rare disciplinary case involving familial misconduct. I called it overdue. Still, what broke her wasn't the court. It wasn't even the public disgrace. It was what happened at Junie's school. The principal, a kind man named Mr. Albert, invited me and Junie to a school assembly. They were launching a new initiative, No More Silence, aimed at teaching children how to speak up about abuse at home. I sat in the back, next to Junie, who clutched my hand and leaned her head against my shoulder. Her teacher stood at the podium and cleared her throat. "Today," she said, "we are going to read from a very special journal. It belonged to a woman who stayed silent for too long but decided, finally, to break that silence not for herself, but for the little girl who still needed her." She read from my entries. "He hit me again today." Coraline watched. I told her I tripped. I wonder if she believed me, or if she's just pretending like I am. Either way, I've failed her. A murmur rippled through the audience. The teacher continued, "Love should not sound like shouting. Protection should not look like bruises. Silence should not stretch across generations like inheritance." She paused, and then read the last line aloud, her voice steady. "Silence can kill 3 generations at once. I will not let it kill the 4th. The room was silent. Junie turned to me, eyes wide and wet, and whispered, "That was you, wasn't it?" I nodded. And then, from behind us, came the sound of footsteps. Coraline. She looked different. The gloss was gone. No heels, no blazer. Her hair pulled back in a ponytail that revealed the hollows under her eyes. She walked up to me after the assembly, her expression unreadable. "I didn't know they were going to read that," she said. "You were never supposed to hear it," I said. "It was never for you. It was for her." She looked at Junie, then back at me. Her eyes welled up. "Are you happy now?" she whispered. "You got your justice. You got your public humiliation. Is this what you wanted? Me ruined?" For years, she'd waited for me to break. She never imagined she'd be the one bending first. I stood slowly, every joint, reminding me that I was still an old woman. But my voice was steady. "No," I said. "I'm not happy." She flinched. "I'm relieved." "Relieved?" she spat. "Yes," I said, "because for the first time in your life, I don't see you hurting the child inside you. I see you crying for her. I see you grieving her. And that's the first step." She turned away, shoulders shaking. I didn't stop her. Some grief has to be walked through alone. But as she left, Junie reached up and squeezed my hand. "Do you think Mama will be okay?" she asked. I looked toward the door Coraline had disappeared through. "I think," I said, "she finally has a chance." We moved back into the house on the hill in early spring. 6 months had passed since the hearing, long enough for the snow to melt and the noise to fade. It looked smaller than I remembered, and the shutters hung crooked on one side. The porch had a lean to it, and the back fence had all but surrendered to time. But when Junie stepped inside and whispered, "It smells like cinnamon," I knew we were home. The first few weeks were quiet, unsettlingly so. After months of slammed doors, tight voices, and tiptoed mornings, the silence felt like something we had to learn how to trust again. We slept with the windows cracked open. We hung wind chimes. We left the doors unlocked during the day. I planted tomatoes and sweet basil along the side of the house where the sun hit hardest. Junie insisted on keeping chickens for eggs and company, she said, so we built a little coop from salvaged wood. Each hen had a name. Mildred was the loudest. Cheryl refused to share her nesting box. I didn't mind the chaos. It reminded me of a kind I could welcome. At night, Junie and I sat on the porch with mugs of warm milk and wrote in our journals. I gave her her own little notebook, a soft, cloth-covered thing with pages that smelled faintly of cedar. I told her it wasn't just for bad memories, but for good ones too, so she would remember that survival isn't only about getting through pain, but about choosing joy on the other side. We called it the Survival Diary. Some days, she wrote about the garden. Other days, she wrote letters she never sent. Once, I caught her drawing a picture of Coraline with a sad face and the words, "I think Mama wanted to be strong so badly, she forgot how to be kind." I didn't tell her to stop. One evening, just as the sky turned that deep lavender that only Montana skies can, she asked, "Ba, do you think you'll ever forgive Mama?" I didn't answer right away. I listened to the wind move through the pine trees. I listened to the chickens settling into their coop. Then I said, "I already have." She turned to me, surprised. "But," I added, "I haven't forgotten. Forgiveness is for me. Forgetting is for them. I forgive so I can sleep. I remember so it doesn't happen again." Junie nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "Will she ever come visit?" "Maybe," I said, "when she's ready to be honest and gentle." Junie was quiet a long time. Then she whispered, "I hope she learns." "So do I said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "But if she doesn't, we'll still be okay." We were more than okay. We were healing. Each week, Ruthie called to check on us. The local library invited me to speak at a support group. I read a few entries from my old journal and watched women in their 60s nod with tears in their eyes. One of them clutched my hand and said, "I thought I was the only one who waited too long." "There's no such thing as too long," I told her. "If you're still breathing, you're still here. And if you're still here, you still get to choose." Junie started smiling in her sleep. That's how I knew the nightmares were fading. She danced barefoot in the grass, named every worm in the compost bin, and wrote songs about strong grandmas and messy houses. One morning, I found her humming while she folded laundry. She looked up at me and grinned. "I think our house is a little bit magic, because it knows we were broken, and it still holds us steady." I smiled back. "Why's that?" "Because it knows we were broken, but it still holds us." Yes, that old house, creaking and uneven, was holding us better than any mansion ever could. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was living. When the invitation came in the mail, I almost threw it away. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope with a gold seal and a letterhead that read, "The Silence Ends Here Foundation, Inaugural Gala." Inside was a formal request asking me to be the guest speaker for the opening night of a statewide initiative to combat generational abuse. There would be cameras, journalists, speeches, spotlights. Everything I had avoided my whole life. I set the letter on the kitchen counter, stared at it for days. Each time I passed, it whispered a little louder. Now the world wants to hear you. But I wasn't interested in telling my story on stage. I had already lived it, survived it, breathed through every bruise and betrayal, and stitched together a life that no longer needed applause. So I declined with one condition. I'll write something, I told the organizers over the phone, but someone else will read it. They asked who. My granddaughter, I said. She's the reason this story matters. And so, under the soft glow of stage lights, in a modest community hall in Bozeman, Junie Bell Merrick stood behind a podium. Her shoes barely touched the floor. Her voice was small, but steady. She unfolded a single piece of paper, cleared her throat, and read. My grandmother once wrote, I used to believe silence was love. That keeping the peace was better than telling the truth. But I was wrong. Silence is where fear grows. And I will not hand that down like fine china. I will not teach my granddaughter how to whisper through pain. Junie paused, her eyes scanning the room. She took a breath and continued. She also wrote, I was once the woman who stayed silent, but I won't be the woman who teaches her grandchild to do the same. The room erupted into applause. People stood, tears flowed. I watched from the back, hidden in the shadows, hand pressed to my chest, heart thudding like it used to when I heard keys in the door at midnight. But this time, the sound meant something else. It meant freedom. The clip of Junie reading that passage made its way across Montana. Then the country. Women wrote in. Teachers shared it in classrooms. Shelters printed the words and taped them above bunk beds. I received hundreds of letters. Most ended the same way. Thank you for reminding us that it's never too late to speak. And Junie, my fierce, curious, unbreakable girl, became a voice for children who hadn't yet found their words. Her school asked her to give the end-of-year speech at the assembly. She stood in front of her classmates in a yellow dress, her hair in braids, and said, My grandma says women don't need to scream to be heard. They just need the courage to speak, even if their voice shakes. And then she smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a practiced one. The kind that says, I am no longer afraid. Now, every evening, we sit on our little porch again. The wind is softer now. The chickens quieter. I hold her hand in mine and watch the Montana sun pour gold onto her face. She doesn't know I've started writing again. Not just journals. Letters. To women in shelters. To girls who ran. To grandmothers who stayed. I end each one the same. Revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's peace. Sometimes it's a child laughing in a house where no one yells anymore. But I hope they remember this. Silence is a door. And courage is the key. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story stirred something in your heart, if you believe silence is no longer an option, and if you felt the quiet strength of a grandmother who's seen too much and stayed too silent for too long, then please subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Here, we share real memories, stories of betrayal, survival, quiet justice, and the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Because when a grandmother speaks, the world should listen. See you in the next story.